Hey guys, it is Faceless Chris. You're probably wondering why I'm here if you've been following the channel for a while, and I make this really quick because I know you guys just probably want to see the audiobook. Basically, I did audiobooks for a while, up until Bunny Call, and I'll put a playlist in the top right there, so you can check out all the other audiobooks. I stopped because I was basically just reading the book, and I felt like that was kind of disrespectful, considering that it just let people have the book for free that someone worked really hard on. And so now I have come up with what I think is a better way to do this. Basically, I'm still going to be doing the audiobook here, starting today, at least for the time being. But the way it's going to work is it's going to be more reaction based. This is going to be more of me giving my thoughts on these stories because I've read most of them already. I've done videos where I've ranked Fazbear Frights before and stuff, and you guys seem really interested in that. And so I figured, let's read these stories again, since it's been a while since they've been out. And I'll read the whole story, but I'll also give some of my thoughts in real time, so we can kind of discuss it as it's happening. And I'll do this with Blackbird, The Cliffs, Gumdrop Angel, Puppet Carver, all the books, future ones as well, until the series ends. Which means I have to do this for 6 more books, so if you haven't read these stories yet, this is a great opportunity for you guys to do so, I think. Pick up the book and you can follow along, you know? That's what a lot of people did before. It seemed like they really enjoyed following along and hearing, what little thoughts I did have. I'm going to be trying to get more of those in here. So, no further ado. Let's start with Blackbird. Now, Blackbird was one that I've said feels very similar to older stories like 1:35 a.m. and such. But that being said, I really don't mind it very much. I really do enjoy this story. On its own, it works really well. I think the reason that I mainly just don't like it as much as some other people do is just because it's pretty similar to ones that we've had before. I have no ill intent towards the story. Let's see how I feel after reading it once more and gathering some more thoughts on it, hopefully. Alright, here we go. It needs to be bloody. Noel sat backward on his chair, hit straight back between his splayed legs. In spite of the chair's cheap tan plastic and the rest of the room's less than upscale ambience, Noel managed to look cool and confident. Sam wondered how he could pull that look off so easily. Feeling like the nerd that he was, Sam tried to adjust his long legs to fit another of the cheap plastic chairs. He disagreed with Noel. Horror is not in the blood, it's in the creep factor. Creep factor, Noel repeated. It's a technical term. Noel nodded. I must have dozed off when Grimley was talking about that. More likely you were staring at Darla Stewart. You make a good point. And we're not getting anywhere. Sam sighed and shifted in his seat again. His legs were cramping. He was hungry. And he was pretty sure he and Noel were the only pair in the room who hadn't come up with an idea yet. Although Sam's back was to the rest of the space, he could hear the jumble of 8 hushed conversations going on all over the grey-walled room. The classroom had little to muffle the intense babble. A few folding tables, some plastic chairs, a portable closet packed with sound equipment, and a viewing screen. Through an open door behind Noel, Sam could see the project room, which had open space for filming scenes, a green screen, and several shelves stuffed full of more AV equipment. The conversations between Sam's classmates were mostly incomprehensible, because they were taking place in cautious whispers and mumbles, lest a brilliant idea get stolen. Occasionally, though, someone would get excited, and Sam could make out a word or two. Serial killer, zombie, vampire, demon. The words he heard drained some of the tension from his shoulders. If those were the other team's ideas, maybe he and Noel still had a chance. They didn't have an idea yet, but at least they didn't have a done-to-death idea. I kind of agree with Sam on his whole, cliche idea, Those are all very cliched ideas. It's weird because considering what happens in this story, it's cliched for the series, but not for horror in general, I don't think. Like, it uses ideas that have been used in the series before, but in terms of horror in general, they're pretty uncommon. It doesn't have much blood, this story, and so I'm kind of like taking a look at what their ideas for their story are here, compared to what happens like later in the story. You have to admit, she has a fine caboose, Noel said. Sorry, anyway. Sam stretched all 37 inches of his legs and stared at his huge feet. Both Sam's legs and his feet defied the normal proportions that should have gone with his 6'5" body. According to a chart his doctor showed him once, his legs should have been about 34.5 inches long. You wouldn't think 2.5 extra inches would be much, but apparently they were enough to make Sam look like a stork, or a heron, or a crane. He'd heard all three of these from various unkind kids, and those inches were enough to make him prone to grand displays of ungainly clumsiness, which prevented him from turning his height into something useful, like, say, on a basketball court. All Sam's legs did, as far as he could tell, was get in his way. Earth to Sam? Huh? Looks like we're lagging here, dude. Noel gestured out into the room behind Sam's shoulders. Sam looked around. 4 teams were leaving the room. 2 were getting ready to leave. Only 2 other teams were still talking. Great. Actually, it was kind of great. Sam thought better in silence. He looked at his watch. The classroom was open for another half hour. They had 30 minutes to come up with some sort of idea. Would you get out of that chair? Noel flung his foot out and kicked the side of Sam's seat. You're squirming so much you remind me of my nephew when he needs to take a piss. I can't get comfortable. My heart bleeds. There you go with the blood again. Noel grinned. It's all about the blood. Seriously, we need to think. Hey. Noel's blaze posture disappeared. He glanced over at the remaining teams. Seriously, dude, get off the chair. Come over here. Noel exited his chair with invisible grace, and he took a couple steps to the wall behind him. Sliding down the wall, he folded his normal-length legs, perfectly proportioned for his 6'1" height, into a meditative position. He motioned to Sam again, and Sam hesitated. So Sam gave up on the too small chair and awkwardly put his skinny body on the floor in front of Noel. He had to admit his legs were happier. Noel leaned forward and spoke softly. Do you remember Freddy Fazbear's pizza? Noel's breath smelled like licorice. Sam leaned away. Sure, why? Noel lowered his voice into a whisper so faint Sam had trouble understanding him. All he heard was creepy animatronic, but that was enough. Oh, those! Sam felt goosebumps on his arms. He was glad he was wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt so Sam wouldn't see how the mention of the characters affected him. Yeah, those were creepy all right. Thinking about pizza gave me the idea, Noel said. What idea? Noel gazed over the classroom again. Sam checked it too. Only one other team was left. It was the infamous Darla, her fine caboose, and her friend Amber, who actually was the nice one of the 2 girls. They had their heads together and seemed to be having a whispered disagreement. They weren't paying any attention to Noel and Sam. My idea is to write a horror story plot around a creepy animatronic of our own, Noel whispered to Sam. Sam, edgy from just thinking about Freddy Fazbear's animatronic characters, had to admit that was a great idea. I like it. Awesome. Noel held out a fist, and Sam bumped it. So what would be a good character? Noel asked. You're asking me? You're the genius. Sam wasn't a genius, but he did get good grades. Some people, like Noel, who tended to be a bit of a screw-off, got those things confused. Sam leaned back and looked at his feet again. A good animatronic character. A good animatronic character. A good animatronic... Sam looked at his legs. Stork, heron, crane. How about a bird? Not a chick, obviously. Something more intimidating. That's not bad. How about a goose? A goose? Sam repeated loudly. He laughed. Don't laugh. A goose attacked me when I was little. I still bear the scars. Seriously? Noel pulled up the left leg of his faded jeans. He pointed at a white scar below his knee. It bit you? Well, no, it chased me while I was on my bike. I fell off my bike and cut my knee. Sam laughed again. Noel dropped his pant leg. Sorry, Sam said. I can see you're traumatized. Noel stared blankly into the middle distance. You have no idea. I probably need therapy. I don't think I want to do a horror film about an animatronic goose, Sam said. You're right. We need the creep factor. What's a creepy bird? You guys win the rotten egg prize, Amber called from across the room. Saving the best for last, Noel said, holding his clasped hands above his head in a victory gesture. Amber laughed. You're an idiot. Darla said nothing, and the 2 girls left the room, talking about a poetry reading for their English class. She likes you, Sam said. She thinks I'm an idiot. So she likes you, and she knows you. Noel kicked Sam's foot. Sam returned to the problem. Oh, I've got it. He sat up and said, in a solemn, ominous tone, Once upon a midnight dreary. Huh? Oh, come on, you're not that much of an idiot. I might be. Quoth the raven, Sam prompted. Huh? Oh, wait, I know this. That poem by the scary dude? Poe. Oh, a raven. Why are these stories always mentioning Edgar Allan Poe? It's literally all the time. I'm very confused. But seriously, it's a lot. Like, I think Count the Ways mentioned him. And I'm sure there were others. Anyway, yeah, a raven, only, no, not quite. The raven obviously is cliche. A crow would be too. I'm thinking of a blackbird. It has the same connotation, but blackbirds are a little smaller. They're songbirds, and we actually have more of them in our area than we do crows or ravens. I like how they don't mention what area they're in. Very clever. Probably hurricane or something if I had to take a guess. How do you know this stuff? I'm a genius, remember? No, I'd forgotten because I'm an idiot. They both laughed. Okay, so we've got a creepy blackbird, Noel said. Now what? Ever had one of them stare at you? Sam asked. I mean, really stare at you. There was one in the quad the other day. I was thinking about skipping Psych 201, and that bird kept looking at me. I felt so guilty I went to class. Sam snapped his fingers. That's dumb, but I think you're onto something. What? Guilt. Idiot here, remember? You need to spell it out. Our animatronic, the Blackbird, Sam gave the name finger quotes, will get you to confess your darkest secrets, and then when you do, it comes to punish you for your sins. It never lets you off the hook, never lets you rest. We can have the Blackbird basically hound some poor dude to death. Will there be blood? Noel asked. You're a ghoul, Sam chewed on his lower lip. Actually, a little blood might not be bad. If you prick us, do we not bleed? Wow, Sam said. You're quoting Shakespeare? Maybe your idiot thing is all an act. I'll never tell. The Blackbird will make you tell, Sam said with a wicked laugh. Sam and Noel finally finished plotting the movie just in time for their next class. Even though he was arguably too tall for the role, Sam thought it would be fun to play the Blackbird. Noel, who honestly didn't want to dress up like a bird, and Sam's size would make the Blackbird even scarier. That left Noel with the part of the poor, beleaguered, guilty guy. I can do pathetic, Noel said proudly that day as they shared a pizza. That you can, Sam agreed. When Noel and Sam were only halfway through their pepperoni and jalapeno pizza, Amber came into the brick-walled restaurant and spotted them. Do you have room for one more? Room for one more? Guys, I don't know if you know this, but Room for One More is another story in Fazbear Frights. It's actually a pretty popular story in Fazbear Frights. Did you know she said Room for One More? That's another story in Fazbear Frights. She pointed at the black vinyl booth seat Noel sat on. Noel scooted over. Sure, but keep your mitts off our pizza. I don't want your stinking pizza, Amber said. Sam grinned at Amber as she flagged down a server and ordered a soda. So, what's your movie about? She asked. Wouldn't you like to know? Noel said, eyes narrowed in suspicion. Amber sniffed. As if I was just making conversation. What's yours about? It's about knitting. Her smirk said she was feeling pretty good about her project. Are you serious? Noel asked. Absolutely. Will there be blood? Noel asked. Now I kind of want to see her movie, actually. Shoot, I wish we could see it now. Oh, well. Sam laughed and shook his head. Plenty, Amber said. Noel pointed at Sam. See? It's gotta have blood. Sam ignored him. The pizza place was crowded and noisy. Above the smells of spicy pepperoni, sausage, and tomato sauce, the small space thrummed with the beat of classic rock coming from overhead speakers. Sam waved to a few friends, then watched Amber watch Noel. Sam wasn't sure why Noel didn't ask Amber out. She was cute. Not Sam's type. The few girls he'd gone out with were taller and more serious than Amber. But Noel liked girls he could laugh with, and girls seemed to like Noel's blue eyes, athlete's body, and scruffy blonde hair. Amber, who was also blonde, blue-eyed, and in good shape, like every character in this series, looked good sitting next to Noel. She even dressed like he did, usually wearing faded jeans, white shirts, and, when the weather allowed it, leather jackets. Sam blinked when Amber leaned across the table, blowing the paper wrapping off the end of her straw and toward his face. He told me your movie's about a bird. I think he's lying. Sam smiled. Actually, he's not. You mean, like, the birds? Noel snorted and waved a slice of pizza around. We're not that derivative. Ooh, big word, Amber said. Sam laughed. Actually, they were a little derivative, weren't they? They were piggybacking off of Freddy Fazbear's pizza. The hair on the back of Sam's neck prickled. Why did that happen every time he thought of the place? Sam pulled out his wallet and threw some cash on the table. I need to get started. On what? Amber asked. We'll never tell, Noel said. Amber smacked his arm. Ah, Sam thought. True love. Many of Sam's classmates thought it was pathetic that he lived at home, but he loved it. First, he got along great with his parents, who were supportive and fun. Second, he had way more privacy and space than he'd have in a dorm. His parents had remodeled the basement into a sprawling apartment for him with his own kitchenette, bathroom, sleeping area, and space for his film projects. And third, he liked getting away from the campus at the end of the day. He could only take so much of the constant chatter, scholastic and social angst, and the frantic pace. Besides, he had no use for partying. Working on his projects was more fun than drinking and acting like a moron. Sam's house was about 2 miles from the college, an easy distance to walk, which was good, since he didn't have a car. He enjoyed the walk home, too. It followed the railroad tracks that ran along the top of a steep, forested drop-off into a rocky trench and culvert that separated farmland from the college's expansive acreage. Sam liked to pretend he was an old-timey vagabond, strolling along waiting to hop a train to travel to faraway adventures. In fact, Sam was working on a screenplay about freight hoppers set in the mid-20th century. He knew it was a tough lifestyle, but it held romantic appeal for him, mainly because he never felt like he fit in with mainstream life. And, of course, his current project wasn't going to help with that. 3 days after Sam and Noel decided on their horror movie plot, Sam sat in the special order desk chair his mom had gotten for him, at the huge craft table in the basement. Covering the pale blonde wood table were piles and piles of long black feathers. Luckily, Sam's dad was a merchandiser who had a gift for finding rare items. He could locate pretty much anything Sam ever needed for his projects. Today, his dad had met Sam in the driveway with several crates of feathers, which he'd helped Sam transport down the basement stairs. Before leaving the basement, Sam's dad sang out, "Bye-bye, Blackbird." "Very funny, Dad," Sam called up the stairs. He smiled at the answering chuckle and began pulling feathers from the crates. Sam's idea for the Blackbird costume was to weave long black feathers into a netted black fabric that would then be sewn onto a black body-hugging suit, like a feathered body wrap. This was going to require a lot of feather placing, affixing, and sewing. So Sam queued up some bluesy jazz and got to work. At 11:30 p.m., Sam startled when the phone rang. It was Noel. "Amber asked me out." "Good. I thought I was supposed to do the asking out." "Have you ever heard of women's lib?" "Vaguely, but I come from a family of male chauvinists. I'm still in the learning curve." "What did you say to her?" Sam winced, stabbing his finger with the needle for the 100th time. "I said yes. I couldn't think fast enough to say anything else. Besides, I've decided her caboose might be as fine as Darla's." "Well, that's important. How's the costume coming?" "Good, I think. I should have it done by tomorrow afternoon, and then we can work on the set." "Which is a tragedy," Noel complained. "The set?" "No, working on it tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Saturday. Saturdays are for frolicking." "It's the only time we could get the shooting studio assigned to us," Sam reminded him. "A pity." Sam ignored him, hung up the phone, and returned to sewing feathers. A few hours later, he put the finishing touches on the costume, attaching to the head 2 beady yellow and black eyes and a tiny, pointed orange beak. Even though he was exhausted, he donned the suit and stood in front of the full-length mirror behind the bathroom door. Sam nearly shrieked when he saw himself, because what he was looking at wasn't him anymore. It was so not him, he was tempted to tear off the suit and find himself again. He felt like his creation had assimilated him. He'd been transformed. He couldn't see any part of Sam. All he saw was a monster-sized Blackbird. His design had come out just the way he'd envisioned it. The oversized proportions made the suit look almost kid-friendly, but the wide, dead eyes and dripping midnight feathers were deeply unsettling. He had no doubt that poor Floyd, the character in their movie, would seriously regret his dark secrets when he came face-to-face with the Blackbird. Thanks to the massive quantity of feathers his dad got for him, Sam had been able to approximate the full belly shape of a Blackbird. He'd fashioned the curve of the belly to come all the way down to below his knees, the bird's legs stared to his shins, conveying realistic proportions. His mom had helped him with the feet part of the costume. His mom, who loved all things crafty, found a pair of stretch-to-fit water shoes and extra-large black tights with a scales pattern. She also showed Sam how to shape his bird toes out of black rubber, into which he then carved deep grooves. Together they used sculpting epoxy to create bird claws, which Sam inserted into the rubber toes. He attached the bird feet to the water shoes so it looked like the toes extended out naturally. At first glance, Sam was a huge Blackbird, and he was beyond creepy. Now, they just needed a little blood. Sam laughed. Maybe then Noel would shut up about the blood. Noel and Sam met Saturday afternoon to design their movie set. Noel would rather have been playing volleyball with his fraternity brothers, but in spite of his nonchalant posturing, film class mattered to him. Plus, he was stoked about their movie. When Noel arrived in the shooting studio, Sam immediately showed him a picture of the Blackbird suit. Noel was glad Sam wasn't looking at him when Noel first saw the picture. He was pretty sure he went pale. It felt like he'd gone pale. He was suddenly gotten cold and weak and shaky. What was happening? When Sam turned to ask Noel what he thought, Noel bent over and pretended to tie his shoe. "It's rad. Above and beyond, dude." "Yeah? Thanks. I kind of freaked myself out when I looked in the mirror," Sam said. Noel rose, pretty sure his normal coloring was back. Leave it to Sam to admit he was freaked out. Sam had no clue how to be cool. He was too honest, too open, and too himself to get within sniffing distance of cool. Okay, so we're thinking bedroom, right? Sam stood in the middle of the set. Nightmares, night terrors, cold sweats, paranoid self-defense, panicked phone calls. Yeah, I think this is the ultimate in a film for a one-room set. Noel pretended to speak into a megaphone. Step right up, folks. Get all your creep factor right here. One-stop shopping. Sam laughed. Noel grinned. Sam wasn't bad-looking when he laughed, Noel thought. Sam's problem was that he always looked so serious. With strong features, a wide mouth, and sharp jawline, Sam usually came across as harsh and angry, even when he wasn't. His face was like one of those carvings on totem poles. In fact, when Noel had met Sam at the beginning of the semester the previous year, he'd asked Sam if he was a totem pole. The dude was so tall, and he wore a lot of black, red, and tan. Do I have something on my face? Sam asked. Just your ugly mug. Noel gave Sam a playful punch to let Sam know he was kidding. Come on, man. Sam tossed Noel a screwdriver. Let's get to work. Over the next 2 hours, they built furniture, hung pictures, made a bed, and argued about which personal and decor items went where and why. Sam seemed to have a particularly entrenched opinion about dirty socks. This movie is about airing your dirty laundry and what happens to you when you do. The dirty sock should have a prominent place in the visual narrative, not just be tossed off to the side, Sam said. Noel held up his hands. I give. After another half hour, Noel was getting bored. So, Sam, what dark secrets did the Blackbird get out of you? Sam dropped the stack of magazines he was carrying. Noel laughed. Guilt much? Sam shook his head. Coincidence. Uh-huh. Noel looked at Sam. Well? I don't have any dark secrets, Sam said. The way he industriously cleaned up the magazines made Noel think Sam was hiding something. Come on, dude, spill, Noel laughed. The secrets, not the magazines. Sam finished restocking the magazines, and he straightened. He looked down at Noel. Nothing to spill. What about you? Sam really is a nerd, Noel thought. He wasn't the kind of guy Noel usually hung around with. But Sam was a genius in film class. Always hitch your wagon to the best horse. Noel's grandmother used to say that. Noel's grandfather was a multimillionaire. Noel figured taking his grandfather's advice was pretty wise. Okay, Noel conceded. I'll tell you mine. He threw himself on the bed and put his hands behind his head. I borrowed that bedspread. Fine, Mom. Noel kicked off his shoes. Sam ignored him and started hanging curtains over a fake window. So, I'm not proud of this, Noel said. But was that true? It might be possible if he was really telling the truth about his dark secret that he was a little proud of it. If it's a dark secret, I don't know why you'd be proud of it, Sam said. Okay, whatever. So, when I was in junior high, I would have been maybe 12 or so. I guess I was a bully. Sam turned around and gave Noel a long look. What do you mean? Sam asked. You know, a bully, Noel chuckled. A pretty ruthless bully, actually. Give me an example, Sam said. What was wrong with Sam's voice? It sounded stiff. Noel looked up at the ceiling and thought back. Well, you know, the usual. Basically, I called him as I saw him. Sam leaned against the wall and stared at Noel. I still don't get it. Noel sat up in the bed. Okay, so there was this really awkward fat girl. She had all these, weirdo habits. She wouldn't look you in the eye, and she was always squeezing her hands together, and she had trouble talking. She didn't stutter, but she seemed to have trouble figuring out just how to talk. She was just weird. She had funny facial expressions, and she wore the stupidest clothes I've ever seen. I mean, it looked like she did all her shopping at thrift stores, not the cool ones. Her clothes never matched and stuff. So I started calling her secondhand, SH for short. And when she'd walk down the hall, I'd go, shh. It caught on, and pretty soon everyone was doing it. Noel laughed. That was a riot, stuff like that. Oh, and then one time she came to school wearing these high-water pants. I mean, she looked so stupid, so my friends and I threw water in her face. Get it? High water? Noel laughed. And she wore those thick glasses and always looked like she was squinting to find her way, so I put a dead mole in her locker and asked her if she was grieving her best friend. Noel guffawed. Sometimes he just cracked himself up. He looked at Sam. Sam wasn't laughing. Sam pulled out the chair they'd placed in front of the desk in Floyd's room. You really think that stuff is funny? Sam asked. Well, yeah, Noel said, don't you? You have to admit, it's clever stuff, right? There was this time I got, a bucket full of burrs. That took a while to do, too. It's not easy gathering burrs. But see, the girl's name was Christine Wilbur. I remember her name because of the burr thing. And she had this long, stringy hair that she never washed enough. So I figured I'd do burrs for Christine Wilbur. Get it? Burrs for Wilbur? It was actually an experiment. I wanted to see if burrs would stick to greasy hair. Of course, I had to have a control, so when I threw the burrs, I also threw them at her friend Valerie. Valerie had frizzy hair that I was pretty sure she washed too much, and sure enough, the burrs stuck better on Valerie than they did on Christine. I'll never forget them standing there outside the school like a couple of monkeys picking off lice of each other, trying to get those burrs out of their hair. Now that was funny. Noel laughed. Sam shook his head. That's not funny. Noel raised an eyebrow but didn't stop laughing. Seriously? Picture it. They're like two little monkeys. He pretended to be a monkey picking lice off another monkey. Sam frowned, stood up, and started pacing around the fake room. Noel leaned back on the bed again. He pulled out a pillow from under the bedspread and plumped it up. I just made that bed, Sam snapped. Chill, I'll fix it when I get up. Sam kept pacing. Then he abruptly stopped. Unless you're blind, you have to have noticed I'm not a normal-looking guy, right? Noel tilted his head. You're tall, but so are a lot of my frat brothers. They're tall and athletic, Sam said. I'm just tall. Okay. So, when I was in junior high, I was already way too tall for my age. And my legs looked even longer than they do now because I was so skinny. So, guess what happened to me? Noel figured Sam was bullied, but he decided to wait and let Sam tell his story. Noel knew he could be an idiot, but he wasn't stupid. I was bullied basically from the time I entered first grade until I got my freshman year in high school. Then, that year it stopped. But I can tell you that those jokes you think are so funny, they're not funny to the people on the receiving end of them. Sam crossed his arms and glared at Noel. Noel laughed. Dude, you look so much like a totem pole right now. Or no, you look like one of those wooden Indian statues. Noel sat up, crossed his arms, and intoned, How? Noel fell back on his bed and laughed. Sam shook his head and turned around. And that's offensive. Let's just get this done, huh? Noel got off the bed. Still grinning, he remade the bed, but maybe not as neatly as Sam had done it. And who said Floyd was compulsive about his bed anyway? Are you okay, dude? Noel asked. Sam was keeping his back to Noel. I'm good. Sam turned around and surveyed the room, not looking at Noel. I think we're done here. How about we call it good for now, and I'll bring my costume from home tomorrow so we can start filming. You don't want to run through the lines now? You're the one who has the lines. I thought you said you already knew them. I do. Well, then I'd say we're done. Sam stepped over to the bed and fixed Noel's messy bed-making job. He flicked Noel a look and said, see you tomorrow, and strode out of the shooting studio. I might have gotten on one of that dude's big old nerves, Noel said to himself. Then he chuckled again. He did crack himself up. Returning from his date that evening with Amber, Noel sauntered down the hall to his single room in the frat house, bopping his head in time to the music that vibrated the walls. The speakers were on the first floor, and this was the third, but his frat brothers were partying hard tonight. The whole house shook. It also smelled like beer, knockwurst, and unwashed laundry. He wrinkled his nose. Noel didn't mind the noise, but he didn't love the smell. Noel wouldn't have admitted it to anyone, but he wasn't really fraternity material. He'd pledged this frat because his dad and granddad had been members, and he had assumed he'd be one too. But it was a cool frat, and Noel was all about doing what it took to be cool. So he was content, especially since he'd won the room lottery at the beginning of the year, which got him the best single room in the 3-story, 2-door mansion that housed the frat. The door Noel was strolling past flew open, and a muscular, rumpled guy with spiky black hair scratched his bare belly and squinted up at the bright hall lights. What time is it? He asked. Almost midnight, Noel asked. You okay, Ian? Ian was a football player, a dedicated one. He was always talking about treating his body as a temple and stuff like that. He liked to walk around in his boxer shorts, showing everyone just what an awesome temple it was. Noel thought Ian was a little bit full of himself, but he did find the guy's boxer shorts amusing. He had dozens of them, all in different colors and patterns. Tonight's were white, but they were covered in bright yellow rubber ducks. Maybe it was the rubber ducks that made Noel notice Ian's gray, clay-like complexion and the dark smudges under his eyes. You don't expect someone wearing rubber ducks to look like they're terminally ill. Not sleeping lately, and now this. Ian waved a hand at the throbbing beat that still massaged the walls of the building. The music keeping you awake? Yeah, doesn't it keep you awake? Nah, nothing keeps me awake. Seriously? Seriously, I can sleep through pretty much anything. I'm envious. I might have trouble sleeping every night. Must have a guilty conscience, Noel said. Ian's eyes widened. What? Chill, I'm just kidding. Noel laughed and punched Ian on the cement he called an upper arm. Ian gave Noel a weak smile and stumbled across the hall to the bathroom. Noel rubbed his knuckles and headed down the hall to his room. Noel arrived back at the shooting studio at noon the next day. even though it was a Sunday, and he generally spent his Sundays watching sports on TV or playing intramural ball with his frat brothers. He figured he should get to the studio on time to mend things with Sam. Even though Sam hadn't said much, he was clearly pretty upset the day before. Noel might have pushed a little too far. He knew he sometimes did that. When Noel discovered Sam wasn't in the studio yet, he stretched out on the bed to wait. 45 minutes later, he was still lying there. He closed his eyes and must have fallen asleep, because when Amber charged into the room, he was so startled he almost fell out of the bed. "Did you hear?" "Huh?" He sat up. "Hear about what?" He rubbed his face. "What time is it?" "It's 2:30. The news about Sam." "What news about Sam?" Amber hugged herself. "They think he might have been hit by a train." She brushed at her puffy eyes. "What?" "Apparently he made a costume for your movie, one with black feathers, and they found feathers all over the tracks for like 2 miles. It's all over the place." Noel shot off the bed. "Is he okay?" Amber shook her head. "That's the thing. They don't know he's missing." "I've got to go." Noel charged past Amber and tore out of the film studies building. The railroad tracks ran along the backside of the campus, behind the cafeteria, rec center, and swimming pool complex. They were about a half-mile from the film studies building, jogging past kids throwing frisbee in the quad, and others studying in the shade of the campus's big cedar trees. Noel ignored several greetings and concentrated on getting to the tracks. Hit by a train? Missing? Noel couldn't believe it. When Noel reached the tracks, his stomach clenched at the sight of a half-dozen cop cars pulling up alongside the tracks, and double that number of cops walking in the area, their gazes to the ground. Pushing into the relatively docile crowd hanging out behind crime scene tape guarded by a large, balding cop, Noel approached the cop and said, "I'm Sam's friend. Have you found him yet?" "Who are you?" the cop asked. "Sam's friend," Noel repeated. "Noel Markham." Noel saw no reason to keep his name a secret. He hadn't done anything wrong, had he? "You know something about what happened here?" the cop asked. "I only know what a friend told me, that because of the feathers you think Sam was hit by a train, and you can't find him." The cop eyed him. Could the guy have been more of a cliché? Big gut, shiny head surrounded by a black fringe of hair, dark eyes squinted to try and intimidate Noel, thick hands resting on his gun belt. The cop could have walked off of a TV set. Except this cop smelled like hair gel and cheap cologne. At least TV cops were unscented. Noel eyed the cop right back. "If you don't have something to tell us," the cop said, toying with his nightstick, "get back there with everyone else." Noel didn't move. He leaned to his right to see past the cop. Even from here, he could see black feathers fluttering over the tracks. The cop shifted his stance, and that's when Noel noticed the tall couple standing between one of the police cars and a bright red Chevy Suburban. They were talking with the guy in a baggy suit. Noel bit the inside of his cheek so he wouldn't groan out loud. Those were Sam's parents. Paul and Molly O'Neill. He'd met them when they threw a party to celebrate the previous semester's completed film projects. Really nice people. Both were tall and dark like Sam, although Sam's mom wasn't as tall. She was almost as tall as Noel, though. Hefty, too. If there was something called Mom League in the NFL, she would have played. "Call me Molly," she'd said when Noel had met her. "Mrs. O'Neill is my mother-in-law." Noel remembered Molly had a great smile and an even better laugh. Right now, she wasn't laughing. She was crying, her head pressed against her husband's shoulder. Noel clenched his fists in frustration. How could he help? Molly looked up and she spotted Noel. "Noel, is that you?" The cop standing with Sam's parents motioned for the TV cop to let Noel past. Noel couldn't stop himself from giving the cop a smirk as he went past, but his smirk died a quick death when he saw Molly's pinched white face. He rushed to Noel and threw her arms around him. "You heard?" "Oh, Noel, he's missing. They say he probably couldn't have survived." Her voice broke and she turned back toward Paul. Paul held Molly with one arm and offered his other hand for Noel to shake. Holding Molly close, Paul said, "Because of the way the feathers of his costume were scattered, they think he was probably grazed by the train and then thrown clear, but they haven't found him." Noel frowned and watched a black feather scuttle over the ground near the rails. That's when he noticed blood on the rail, on the opposite side of the tracks. Not a lot of blood, just one smear, but it was a big smear. And that's part 1 of Blackbird. I think I'm going to do 2 more of this story, judging by how far I've gotten this time. Let me know, I guess, if you haven't read this so far, what your thoughts are. Not much commentary in this one. I didn't really have all that much to say, but I think that's going to change as it goes on. You'll start to see the comparisons with this and 1:35 a.m. as we continue. If you've read that story, it starts to get really similar. But yeah, I think I'm enjoying this more on my second time reading it. So that's a good sign. Yeah, I think I should have the next part done in a few days. Maybe 2, 3, less even, maybe. I usually try to space videos about 3-4 days apart. So, yeah. I'll see you guys then. Goodbye.